palace was silent until a voice broke the stillness. Sarah Ferguson's words cut through the corridor like a blade, leaving Camilla frozen in shock. What followed was no ordinary royal encounter. It was a confrontation the monarchy never wanted exposed. The air inside Windsor's ancient walls seemed heavy, the kind of silence that carries centuries of secrets, until it was shattered by the Duchess of York, a woman long dismissed as a relic of scandal, now standing face to face with the Queen Consort. It was not a meeting of formality, but of fury, and it carried the unmistakable weight of unfinished business. Sarah's sudden appearance at that hour was no accident. Her steps, echoing down the dim corridor, carried a defiance that demanded attention. For too long, she had been sidelined, treated as though her voice held no consequence. Yet here she was, her presence alone unsettling the Queen, who had carved out her place in history with relentless determination. Camilla, startled for a heartbeat, quickly masked her surprise beneath a veil of cold authority. But Sarah's eyes burned with something deeper than resentment. They burned with the fire of a woman who had come for answers, and perhaps vengeance. The tension was palpable, so sharp it seemed to slice through the air. Sarah's grievances, long buried beneath whispered rumors and half-forgotten scandals, now erupted into full view. For years, the palace had tried to paint her as irrelevant, her reputation marred by reckless decisions and humiliating headlines. But at this moment, it was not Sarah's past on trial. Instead, it was Camilla, her rise to power, her grip on the throne, and the legacy she claimed to defend. Sarah's words struck with an anger sharpened by time. Accusations of betrayal, of manipulation, of a quiet cruelty that had hollowed out the family from within. Camilla, ever the master of composure, attempted to steady herself, but the arrogance in her smirk betrayed her unease. To Sarah, that smirk was proof enough that Camilla saw herself untouchable, above reproach, beyond the consequences of the past. Yet, Sarah's fury only grew. For too long, the monarchy had allowed whispers to fester, pretending old wounds had healed. Now those wounds bled raw in the corridor, and Sarah would not let them be hidden again. Nearby, the silent figures of the royal guards shifted uneasily. Their training demanded detachment, but even they could not ignore the escalating storm unfolding before them. Their eyes darted between the two women, instinct telling them that words alone would not contain what was breaking loose. This was no petty exchange, no private quarrel. It was a clash that threatened to rip open the fragile veneer of unity the crown worked so desperately to project. As Sarah's voice rose, echoing against the stone walls, the weight of the past and the fury of the present collided in a single, unstoppable force. The confrontation was more than anger. It was a reckoning, a demand for truth that had been silenced for decades. And while Camilla held her head high, the tremor in her stance betrayed what even she could not deny. This was not a battle she had expected, nor one she could easily dismiss. But what drove Sarah Ferguson to corner Camilla in this forbidden corridor was more than anger. It was a secret long buried that had finally clawed its way to the surface. For years, Sarah Ferguson had remained silent, her voice buried under scandal and exile. But behind closed doors, she carried a secret resentment toward Camilla, one that exploded in this moment. Sarah's journey had not been one of privilege smoothly enjoyed, but of constant battles against shame, headlines, and whispers that followed her like shadows. Once welcomed as the Duchess of York, she had tumbled into disgrace, her mistakes magnified until her very name became a weapon used against her. Where others were forgiven, she was cast aside. And while she spent years clawing her way back into royal relevance, Camilla ascended without apology, stepping into the role of Queen Consort with an ease that felt almost cruel to Sarah. The contrast was unbearable. Sarah had lived through exile, financial humiliation, and endless tabloid ridicule, while Camilla was embraced, crowned, and celebrated as though the past had never happened. To Sarah, it was not just unfair, it was calculated. She believed Camilla had quietly engineered her isolation from the royal circle, whispering into Charles's ear and ensuring that Sarah would never again be fully welcomed into the fold. It was a suspicion that had grown into conviction, fueled by years of half-heard conversations, icy glances, and the way doors seemed to close just as she reached for them. Rumors had long circulated about Camilla mocking her behind closed doors. Palace aides spoke of sharp comments tossed casually, where Sarah was painted as reckless, untrustworthy, and unworthy of the crown's respect. These whispers cut deeper than Sarah ever admitted. But in that corridor, they poured out of her like venom. She accused Camilla of laughing at her expense, of turning her into a cautionary tale to protect her own position. And Camilla's cold silence in response only fed Sarah's rage. But this was not only about her. It was about her daughters, Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie, two women she feared would forever be sidelined because of her own tarnished legacy. Sarah believed Camilla had a hand in ensuring their diminished status, quietly blocking opportunities and limiting their roles in the future of the monarchy. The thought that her daughters were paying the price for her past made Sarah's anger uncontainable. Her confrontation was not just for herself, it was for them, for the place she believed they deserved but would never be given as long as Camilla held power. Every word Sarah hurled was soaked in years of humiliation, in wounds that had never healed, in betrayal that had festered in silence too long. She no longer cared about appearances, no longer feared the consequences of speaking her truth. In that moment, she was not the disgraced Duchess of York. She was a mother, a fighter, and a woman demanding acknowledgement from the very person she blamed for her suffering. But the confrontation didn't remain just personal. Within moments, Sarah's accusations touched the darkest corners of royal history. Camilla's face hardened, her tone cold as steel. If Sarah thought this was her moment of triumph, she was about to discover just how ruthless Camilla could be. For a fleeting second, silence hung heavy. But then, Camilla's lips curved into a faint, cutting smile. She released a short laugh, sharp and dismissive, as though Sarah's fury were nothing more than noise echoing through an empty corridor. To Camilla, Sarah was irrelevant, a relic of disgrace, trying to claw her way back into a world that had long shut her out. Her laughter wasn't amusement. It was an executioner's blade meant to slice away whatever shred of authority Sarah believed she still possessed. In a voice as steady as stone, Camilla reminded Sarah of the one thing she could never escape: her scandals. She spoke of financial ruin, of headlines that branded Sarah reckless, of doors that closed because of her own recklessness. Every word was a reminder of the public shame that had defined Sarah's life, a subtle yet devastating strike to strip her of moral high ground. "You destroyed yourself long before I entered this family," Camilla murmured, the venom beneath her calmness enough to pierce through Sarah's rage. It was not just a dismissal, it was a declaration that Sarah's scars were permanent, her place in the monarchy forever diminished. And then, with the quiet authority of a woman who had mastered survival, Camilla asserted her dominance as Queen Consort. She reminded Sarah that while she had been exiled, mocked, and broken, Camilla had risen, been crowned, legitimized, and embraced by the very institution Sarah claimed to defend. The contrast was deliberate. Sarah was cast as a failure, Camilla as the victor. Yet, the more Camilla spoke, the more dangerous her arrogance became, for it revealed the steel beneath her crown, the conviction that she was untouchable, immune to the wrath of those who despised her. But Sarah was not broken. She struck back, her voice quivering with the rage of decades, accusing Camilla of something darker than personal humiliation. With trembling fury, she declared that Camilla had schemed to erase Diana's legacy, twisting history to crown herself as the true victor in a war Diana had never survived. The name alone shifted the atmosphere. Diana's ghost, invoked so suddenly, seemed to echo in the very air, and for the first time, Camilla's smile faltered. The accusation was not just personal, it was a dagger aimed at the throne itself. Camilla's composure cracked, if only for a breath. Her eyes narrowed, her words cutting deeper, colder. She warned Sarah of secrets best left buried, a chilling phrase that froze even Sarah in her fury. The implication was unmistakable. There were truths too dangerous to be unearthed, shadows in the royal past that could consume more than reputations. The menace behind her warning was not bluster. It was a glimpse into the ruthlessness that had carried her to the crown. And for the first time, Sarah's anger was met not with arrogance, but with something darker, a threat cloaked in silence. The guards shifted uncomfortably, their disciplined stillness betraying unease. They were trained to remain detached, but the confrontation unfolding before them carried a weight they could not ignore. Each glance between them revealed uncertainty. Should they step in, or allow words sharper than blades to keep cutting? The corridors seemed alive with tension. every syllable another spark threatening to ignite something uncontrollable. But what Sarah said next shattered the air, because it was not just about Diana, it was about the monarchy's survival itself. "You destroyed her," Sarah hissed. With those words, Diana's ghost filled the corridor, casting a shadow neither woman could escape. The name itself carried a weight heavier than any crown, a reminder of a woman whose presence still haunted the monarchy long after her death. The accusation wasn't merely spoken, it reverberated through the stone halls, echoing like an unhealed wound. For Sarah, invoking Diana was more than an attack. It was a reckoning, a declaration that the legacy of the people's princess had never been buried, no matter how hard Camilla had tried to silence it. Camilla's face stiffened, the cold mask of authority faltering for the first time. Her defensiveness erupted, her voice sharp, almost venomous. She denied responsibility, dismissing Sarah's charge as melodrama. She spoke of Diana as fragile, a woman unprepared for the brutal reality of royal life. To Camilla, it was an attempt at justification, a way of rewriting history with herself as the inevitable victor. But the word fragile struck me as an insult. To Sarah, it was proof of Camilla's contempt, of her refusal to acknowledge the suffering Diana had endured, or the role she herself had played in it. The tension thickened. Sarah's fury became a storm. Her words no longer controlled, but spilling with the force of decades of suppressed rage. She claimed that Diana's legacy still haunted the throne, that every cheer for William and Catherine, every gesture of affection from the public, was a reminder that Diana's memory could not be erased. Sarah accused Camilla of trying to bury that memory beneath her own reign, of reshaping the monarchy to make Diana little more than a footnote. And with each accusation, the Queen Consort's composure seemed to crack further, her voice rising, her denials sharper, but her control slipping. The guards, stationed nearby, shifted nervously. They were men sworn to protect dignity, to keep the crown above scandal, yet what they heard in that corridor threatened everything they were meant to defend. Their eyes flickered between the two women, their rigid posture betrayed by the unease etched across their faces. Every word spoken was like kindling thrown on a fire that had burned secretly for decades, and the thought that this confrontation could spill beyond the corridor into the world outside made even them tremble. And then came Sarah's most chilling move. Her voice dropped, steady now, deliberate. She hinted that she knew more than Camilla could ever imagine, things whispered in Diana's final days, fragments of truth that had been carefully hidden away. It was not a direct revelation but a warning, a reminder that Diana's story was not finished, and that the secrets left behind could still bring the monarchy to its knees. Sarah's words lingered in the air like smoke, filling the silence with the suggestion of something darker, something unspeakable, waiting to be revealed. But Diana's shadow was only the beginning. Sarah was about to expose something far more dangerous. The confrontation spiraled as Sarah dropped a bombshell. Camilla's betrayal stretched beyond Diana. It extended into the very foundations of royal power. Her voice, once trembling with rage, grew sharper, more deliberate, each word landing like a hammer against the walls of Windsor. Sarah accused Camilla of manipulating King Charles during his most vulnerable years, whispering in his ear when grief and uncertainty clouded his judgment. It wasn't just companionship. Sarah claimed it was control. The image of a future monarch, guided not by duty but by the quiet influence of a woman determined to secure her own place, struck like lightning through the corridor. Sarah's accusations did not stop there. She went further, suggesting that Camilla's hand had reached into the very heart of royal decrees, shaping the future to her own design. Decisions that had altered the standing of certain family members, once dismissed as procedural, were now painted as calculated moves in Camilla's favor. Sarah claimed that what looked like protocol was, in truth, manipulation moves designed to sideline rivals and elevate those who would protect her power. In Sarah's words, Camilla had twisted the crown's traditions for personal gain, turning monarchy into something dangerously close to a private empire. The words grew darker still, as Sarah accused Camilla of dealings outside the palace. She claimed Camilla had secretly negotiated with politicians, not for the crown's dignity, but for her own family's security. Allegiances formed in whispers, promises exchanged in silence. Sarah painted a portrait of betrayal that stretched far beyond jealousy or rivalry. It was a story of influence wielded in shadows, with decisions that touched not just the royals, but the nation itself. If true, It meant the monarchy was not being guided by legacy or law, but by the quiet ambitions of one woman whose power knew no restraint. To add weight to her accusations, Sarah hinted that she had seen documents, letters, fragments of truth buried deep within the palace's archives. She spoke of correspondence that could unravel everything, of written proof that Camilla's reach had extended far further than anyone dared admit. Whether Sarah truly possessed them or not hardly mattered in that moment. Her conviction alone was enough to make Camilla's face stiffen, her composure visibly shaken. The Queen Consort's eyes betrayed a flicker of fear before she quickly tried to mask it with coldness. But the tremor had already shown. Camilla's lips parted, but no words carried the same authority as before. For the first time, silence pressed against her like a weight, as though she knew Sarah's accusations had touched too close to truths that could never be allowed to surface. Her hands clenched, her breath shortened, yet she forced herself to maintain an air of defiance. But the battle of wills was no longer one-sided. Camilla was no longer untouchable. The guards, sensing the escalation, stepped closer. Their presence was no longer passive. The danger had become too real. The corridor pulsed with imminent explosion, the clash of power and betrayal threatening to rip open the monarchy's fragile facade. And just when it seemed the truth could no longer be contained, the guards had no choice but to intervene. Boots echoed on marble as the royal guards stepped forward. Their orders were clear, but whose authority were they truly serving? For long minutes, they had stood as silent witnesses, their hands folded in rigid discipline. But the moment Sarah's voice sliced too close to the crown's secrets, duty called them forward. The sound of their approach carried a finality, as though centuries of protocol had suddenly descended to smother the chaos threatening to consume the corridor. Yet even as they positioned themselves between the two women, it was clear this was no simple matter of control. This was about power, loyalty, and the dangerous question of which truth the guards were there to protect. Sarah did not retreat. Her eyes flashed with the fire of someone who had carried humiliation for too long. And now, with her voice finally breaking through the silence of the palace, she refused to be silenced again. She pushed against the guard's presence, insisting she must finish her words, demanding to be heard not just as a disgraced duchess, but as a witness to betrayal. Her defiance turned the corridor into something larger than stone and shadows. It became a courtroom. And she, the relentless accuser, refused to yield. Camilla, however, was not rattled into silence. With a voice sharpened by authority, she demanded Sarah be silenced immediately. Her command was not spoken as a request, but as an order, the voice of a queen consort who had grown accustomed to obedience. Her words carried the weight of the crown, yet behind them was the unmistakable tremor of someone who felt her grip on power slipping. The contrast was chilling. One woman demanding control, the other demanding truth, and the guards caught between the two. For the men in uniform, the dilemma was almost unbearable. Their oath bound them to the monarch, but their conscience told them the dignity of the crown must not be dragged into scandal. They hesitated, caught in that dangerous space where silence itself became a choice. Were they protecting the queen, or shielding the monarchy from truths too dangerous to echo beyond the palace walls? Every second they delayed added fuel to the fire burning between the two women. The standoff grew heavier. Sarah's voice rose again, sharper now, as she accused Camilla of fearing exposure, of hiding behind the guards because she dared not face the truth herself. The accusation struck like a blade, and even the guards, hardened by years of service, felt the weight of her words press against their composure. The corridor no longer felt like a private exchange. It was transformed into a trial without a judge or jury, where every breath, every glance, was another piece of testimony in a case that would never be written down, yet never be forgotten. The silence after each exchange was louder than the words themselves. It carried the gravity of history, as if the walls were recording every accusation, every denial, sealing it into memory. And as the guards tightened their stance, dividing the two women with an unyielding line of authority, the air itself seemed to demand resolution. Yet no resolution came, only the awareness that the clash had crossed a line that could not be undone. But the confrontation had unleashed ripples that could not be stopped, because whispers of this clash spread far beyond the palace walls. By dawn, the palace buzzed with whispers. The corridor confrontation had been brief, but its impact was explosive. What had begun as a private eruption now spread like wildfire through the veins of the royal household, every aide, attendant, and guard carrying fragments of what they had seen or heard. In the stillness of morning briefings and hushed exchanges, the truth bent and twisted into dangerous shapes, each retelling magnifying the drama, until the clash between Sarah and Camilla became a scandal no corridor could contain. The staff gossip was relentless. Some claimed Sarah's voice had carried through the stone, echoing Diana's name with such venom that even portraits on the walls seemed to tremble. Others swore Camilla had stood tall and unflinching, her words cutting through Sarah's accusations with the cruelty of a victor. Aides divided quickly, each camp forming lines of loyalty. There were those who quietly admired Sarah's bravery, insisting she had spoken aloud the truths too many feared to say. But there were others who defended Camilla with equal passion, seeing Sarah as reckless, jealous, and blinded by her own disgrace. From these divisions came leaks, carefully planted but impossible to control once they began. Select journalists, the kind who thrived on secrecy and shadows, received calls cloaked in anonymity. Details spilled in half-sentences, mentions of Diana, talk of betrayal, whispers of guarded threats. The stories, when printed, were half denied and half confirmed, an odd balance that only fueled speculation. Each denial from the palace seemed too polished, each vague confirmation too pointed, leaving the public certain that something had indeed unraveled behind Windsor's walls. The speculation turned sharper as questions grew. What exactly did Sarah Ferguson know? Was her fury nothing more than resentment? Or did she carry fragments of truth that could shake the monarchy itself? The possibility that she held documents, letters, or secrets passed down through Diana's confidantes became a theory that spread not just among the press, but within the palace itself. The thought that Sarah could hold a weapon powerful enough to damage Camilla's reign gnawed at everyone, forcing them to re-examine every rumor she had ever been tied to. Camilla, sensing the tremors of scandal, moved swiftly but discreetly. Behind closed doors, she began quiet damage control, leaning on loyal aides to contain leaks, pressing confidants to reinforce her image as unshaken and untouchable. Yet even in her efforts to silence the storm, cracks showed. Each whispered denial only heightened the sense that something was indeed being hidden, that the Queen Consort feared what might come next. And as the whispers grew louder, they reached the ears of those who mattered most. Prince William and Princess Anne, both deeply attuned to the fragility of the monarchy's public image, heard of the clash in hushed tones that left them unsettled. For William, the mention of his mother's name struck like a dagger, reigniting old wounds and suspicions. For Anne, the notion that Sarah's voice had been raised with such force made her wonder what truths had been buried beneath years of silence. The seeds of fracture within the family deepened, not just between Sarah and Camilla, but among the heirs themselves, foreshadowing conflicts still to come. And then came the twist no one expected. Sarah Ferguson was not finished. She was preparing her next move. If Camilla thought the palace corridor was the end of Sarah's rebellion, she was gravely mistaken. Sarah was only beginning her counterattack. What had erupted in private now threatened to spill into the public arena, and for the first time in years, Sarah no longer looked like a woman cornered by scandal, but like one prepared to fight. The confrontation had given her something she had lacked for decades. She knew that if she retreated now, the palace machine would crush her once again, branding her words as hysteria and her accusations as nothing more than bitterness. So instead, she turned her fury into strategy. Sarah began quietly seeking allies among estranged royals, those who too had felt the sting of being pushed to the margins. Conversations whispered in shadows began to resurface, and old wounds found fresh voices. Cousins, distant relatives, and those long overlooked by the crown suddenly found themselves listening to Sarah's claims with sharpened interest. She was no longer just a disgraced duchess. She was a rallying point for those who believed Camilla's grip on the monarchy had gone too far. The idea that Sarah might unite them unsettled the palace more than the confrontation itself. Then came the hints, carefully placed suggestions that she held more than accusations. Sarah began speaking, in carefully measured tones, of letters and recordings. Fragments of private words exchanged in rooms where no one expected them to escape. Documents tucked away but never destroyed. She never confirmed their full existence. But the implication alone was enough to send shockwaves. What if Sarah truly possessed evidence that could undermine Camilla's reign? What if her fury wasn't just grief and jealousy, but armed with proof? Suddenly, her defiance carried teeth. Her accusations widened. Sarah did not limit her words to the past, but pointed toward the future. She began to suggest that Camilla, in her hunger for dominance, had endangered the monarchy's stability itself. Choices made for personal gain, she claimed, had compromised the very institution she now represented. And if those choices were exposed, the monarchy would not just appear divided, it would appear corrupt. These words hit like thunder. For an institution that thrived on appearance, perception was everything. The media, always hungry for fissures within the palace, seized on Sarah's sudden boldness. Journalists, who had once mocked her, began circling back, probing, speculating. Headlines turned sharp, asking what Sarah knew and why she was speaking now. Half-truths, innuendo, and rumor filled the press, painting Sarah as a woman who had nothing left to lose, and perhaps, for that reason, everything to gain. Each article fanned the flames, and with every denial from the palace, the public only grew more suspicious. Camilla, once untouchable, now felt the walls closing in. Behind palace gates, her composure was tested, her private fears growing as she realized the story was no longer under her control. Each whisper of letters, each suggestion of recordings, each headline hinting at betrayal chipped away at the image she had so carefully built. The fear was no longer of Sarah's voice alone. It was of what her rebellion had set in motion. The seeds of a wider royal power struggle had been planted, and they were beginning to sprout in places no one could easily contain. What had started as one woman's fury now risked becoming a war for influence that could divide the monarchy from within. But as Sarah moved into the spotlight, one question loomed. How far would Camilla go to protect her crown? The corridor confrontation became more than a personal feud. It was the spark of a power struggle that still haunts the throne today. What was spoken in anger between Sarah Ferguson and Queen Camilla refused to stay confined within palace walls. Its repercussions rippled outward, unsettling the monarchy and raising questions that even time could not silence. The image of royal guards stepping in between two women of the crown unsettled the public imagination. If such intervention was necessary behind closed doors, what darker truths might still be hidden from view? The monarchy's carefully constructed facade suddenly seemed fragile, as though one more blow might bring it crashing down. Camilla's image, once steady in its newfound authority, was fractured. For some, she remained the resilient figure who had weathered storms before. But for many, the confrontation reopened wounds, reviving doubts about her legitimacy and about the cost at which her crown had been secured. In contrast, Sarah's name was recast in conflicting tones. To some, she was reckless, driven by resentment, dangerous in her refusal to let go of the past. Yet, to others, she appeared courageous, a voice that dared to speak what others only whispered. A woman unafraid to challenge the Queen Consort in her own stronghold. The clash deepened existing fractures within the family. Diana's ghost loomed larger than ever, her absence more powerful than presence, her story more alive than any royal decree could suppress. And in that haunting shadow, the monarchy seemed less certain, its future less stable, its unity a brittle illusion. Because in the monarchy, no confrontation ever truly ends. It only hides, waiting for the next corridor, the next secret, the next betrayal. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.